The heat is back on in this episode of Revisited, as we follow up our last outing with Axel Foley in Beverly Hills Cop with the inevitable sequel. Part 1 proved to be such a mammoth hit that not only helped to send Eddie Murphy's career into the stratosphere, but it guaranteed that Part 2 wouldn't be far away.
Goodbye, Mr. James.
I guess that's my cue.
If you take a look back at the 1980s, there are many franchises that started in the era and still have longevity or an influence in modern Hollywood. However, when you have a movie as popular as Beverly Hills Cop, that doesn't necessarily mean that a sequel will match the quality of the first. And it's been a problem that Hollywood has faced over the years. Just how exactly do you keep your inbuilt audience happy while simultaneously bringing something fresh and new to Part 2 without alienating your audience? The answer is probably in finding a happy medium between familiarity and developing the franchise for newcomers. However, that's easier said than done.
That's what I'm afraid of!
Obvious examples where the second in the series have matched or perhaps even surpassed the original have to be films such as Star Wars: The Empire Strikes Back, Aliens, Terminator 2: Judgment Day, Teen Wolf 2. Okay, that last one may have been a dig at the hopeless, hairy follow-up to the fun Michael J. Fox original, but the point is, sequels can be hit or miss. Teen Wolf 2 isn't alone in being a howling disaster, as the 80s and other decades onwards have delivered some prize turkeys from time to time. Staying Alive, Highlander 2: The Quickening, The Sting 2, Speed 2 Cruise Control. The aforementioned titles are all examples of movies that completely shat on the original. However, what I'm getting at is, if done the right way, sequels can be an awesome way to follow up a classic original, or just a shameless cash-in.
I do believe we have a miss!
However, which way did Beverly Hills Cop 2 go? Stay tuned as we tool up Billy Rosewood style here on Revisited.
What took you guys so long?
So unnecessary.
Looking back on the year in which Beverly Hills Cop 2 arrived, 1987, audiences were spoiled by many classic movies that lit up movie theatres. Just consider the following list, and if only modern day movie making had the same level of originality, we'd all be rushing to our local multiplexes in droves. I'm talking about movies such as Predator, RoboCop, Batteries Not Included, The Witches of Eastwick, The Untouchables, Evil Dead 2, Inner Space, Lethal Weapon, Wall Street, The Lost Boys, The Princess Bride, Dirty Dancing, Full Metal Jacket. They were all released in 1987, and that's just several examples.
Your move, creep.
So by the time Beverly Hills Cop 2 was released in October, audiences had been exposed to a seriously good time at the movies. That's not to say there's a glut of originality in modern filmmaking, far from it, but it would be great to see the studios take a punt on some more original ideas, rather than relying on existing franchises or superheroes for audiences to fork out for. After the huge success of the first movie, Paramount Pictures had initially planned on making a TV series based upon the antics of Axel Foley and company. However, leading star Murphy was less than keen on diving headfirst into a TV project, but would be willing to take a punt on a theatrical sequel.
Things like this work out. Trust me.
Fresh from the massive success of Top Gun in 1986, the late great Northeast England born director Tony Scott was chosen by producers Bruckheimer and Simpson to take Axel Foley back to Beverly Hills. Scott had shown an excellent flair for visual storytelling with the Tom Cruise aerial actioner, and his work on The Hunger, plus his previous work in television and advertising, brought him to the attention of the studio and the production team. With everything in place to commence shooting, production began on the movie on November the 10th, 1986, and ultimately wrapped on March the 25th, 1987. Eddie Murphy's salary to reprise his role as Axel Foley was reportedly $8 million, which is quite a chunk of the movie's alleged budget of $27 million. However, what's perhaps not common knowledge to fans of the series is that original director Martin Brest was jettisoned by the producers Bruckheimer and Simpson in favour of Tony Scott. And after the first cut of the movie arrived, it was clear that Scott's not too subtle but effective style was front and centre in terms of action, but it lacked the comedic touch of the first movie. The script shot by Scott didn't have enough gags for the producers' liking. So, despite being impressed by the action beats, they ordered rewrites and subsequently reshot several scenes with more humour. Returning for the sequel, naturally, is Eddie Murphy as the wisecracking cop Axel Foley.
I'm going so deep, sir, you not even know where people going to try to page me. Axel, and no answer, because I'm going to be deep undercover.
As well as detectives Taggart and Rosewood, again played by the irrepressible John Ashton and Judge Reinhold. We also get more of RoboCop veteran Ronnie Cox, who plays an important part in how the narrative develops. Probably the most notable addition to the cast has to be the Danish Amazonian-esque Bridget Nielsen as Carla Fry, a proper wrong'un and a thorn in the side of Foley throughout the movie. German-American actor Jürgen Prochnov joins Nielsen on the side of the bad guys as Maxwell Dent, who may be implicated in the Alphabet Crimes, a series of mostly high-end store robberies distinguished by monogrammed envelopes with an alphabetical sequence that the assailants leave at the crime scene. A few other familiar faces return for the sequel, with the most notable being Paul Reiser's Detective Friedman, Gilbert Roland Hill as the awesome Inspector Todd,
Where the fuck you been, Foley?
Chris Rock as a park and valet, and Playboy legend himself, Hugh Hefner.
Hugh Hefner! Axel Foley!
Unfortunately, we don't get to see Bronson Pinchot's surge in the sequel, but such was the character's popularity, he wouldn't stay away from the franchise for long. As well as the key characters and actors who had to return for part 2, another iconic highlight also makes a return in the sequel. Axel F by Harold Faltermeyer. The synth score that must have helped to sell 1 billion Yamaha keyboards in the 80s is such a cool piece of music and so very 80s that it's now synonymous with the character and the movies. As well as the main theme, we also get some interesting choices on the soundtrack. The song Hold On by Ketta Bill plays during the scene at the Playboy Mansion, while the movie also introduced audiences to George Michael's controversial hit I Want Your Sex. The song reached number 2 on the Billboard Hot 100 and was also a hit internationally. However, it did unfortunately win a Razzie for Worst Song. The Jets' hit song Cross My Broken Heart also features on the soundtrack, as does the hugely popular Shakedown by Bob Seger. Harold Faltermeyer also provided his song Bad Guys for the movie, and while the soundtrack didn't quite hit the heights in the charts as the first movies did, it still provided a suitably upbeat and memorable addition to the movie. As I'll touch upon a little later in this retrospective, Beverly Hills Cop 2 polarised critics when it was first released. While I found it to be a worthy sequel when I first saw it as an impressionable young lad, I've always been in two minds about it ever since. This is the perfect opportunity then to reappraise the film, and I actually appreciate the movie more now than I think I initially did. Sure, the shift in tone that the late great Tony Scott brought to the franchise is a little jarring at first, and you can see why they shoehorned in some extra gags, but that harder edge works in the movie's favour. Scott had great fun choreographing set pieces, shootouts, dangerous chase scenes, so much so that the polished shine he displayed in previous movies really stands out here. The erotic melodrama of 1983's The Hunger may seem like a world away from Beverly Hills Cop 2, but that visual panache is here, and Scott channels as much of the testosterone-fueled mayhem in Top Gun as he can with the action scenes. Also, would anybody have expected Uber producers Don Simpson and Jerry Bruckheimer to not bring anything other than just a facsimile of the first movie, but with more bang for your buck in the sequel? Set 3 years after the events in Beverly Hills Cop, the sequel sees Eddie Murphy's streetwise detective Axel Foley return to the city after an assassination attempt on his friend Captain Andrew Bogomil, played of course by RoboCop legend Ronnie Cox. The action is set against a backdrop of an endless string of violent smash and grab robberies, known, as we mentioned earlier, as the Alphabet Crimes. Detectives Rosewood and Taggart are struggling to solve the case. Their pursuit leads them and Murphy's Axel Foley into another life or death mission. The concept is pretty sound, and the inclusion of Nielsen is a great move. The Danish Amazonian had just come off a trio of roles that saw her star on the rise. The fun but flawed Red Sonja in 1985, and a double bill with Sly Stallone in Rocky IV, also from 1985. Plus action crime thriller Cobra from 1986. Nielsen was married to Sylvester Stallone at the time, and there's a few scenes poking fun at his movies throughout the film, suggesting some tension behind the scenes. Much like in the first movie, the best parts of the sequel, and arguably the funniest, are the scenes in which Murphy plays off against Reinhold and Ashton's Rosewood and Taggart. Their chemistry is great, and they provide some more iconic and memorable sequences to expand upon what we got in the original. Also, while Bridget Nielsen and Jürgen Prochnov make great villains, their evil scheme involving a multi-million heist seems to be slightly convoluted and more elaborate than it needs to be. Overall, however, the movie is a worthy sequel to an admittedly stronger Part 1. It may not have the natural charm and humour that the original seemed to provide effortlessly, but its action and terrific chemistry with the main leads makes this a must-watch, ideally as a double bill with Part 1.
I'm just doing this for my kids. This is the same way Bootsy got killed.
Beverly Hills Cop 2 was one of the most anticipated movies of 1987, and while it didn't make quite as much as Beverly Hills Cop, it was still a box office hit upon release. The film debuted at number 1 at the US box office and recouped $33 million over its opening weekend, making it the highest weekend opening for not just the year, but of all time at the time. It ultimately grossed almost $154 million in the US and Canada, and was the third biggest hit that year, domestically, coming in behind the Bunny Boylan Fatal Attraction and hit comedy 3 Men and a Baby. Its final gross worldwide was $276 million, making it the second highest grossing film of the year. Again, being beaten by Glenn Close's fluffy bunny-hating thriller Fatal Attraction. Critically, the movie was met with a predictably mixed reception. On Rotten Tomatoes, the film has a 46% rotten rating, based on 39 reviews, while the site's critical consensus reads, Eddie Murphy remains appealing as the wisecracking Axel Foley, but Beverly Hills Cop 2 doesn't take him, or the viewer, anywhere new enough to justify a sequel. The Washington Post were very positive in their appraisal of the movie, calling it a sequel that's as good as the original, if not better. Roger Ebert did not like the movie one little bit, awarding it 1 star out of 4 and stating, "What is comedy? That's a pretty basic question, I know, but Beverly Hills Cop 2 never thought to ask it." Megastar Eddie Murphy probably sums up the movie's reception better than anybody with an honest assessment, saying that Beverly Hills Cop 2 was probably the most successful mediocre picture in history. It made $250 million worldwide, and it was a half-assed movie. Cop 2 was basically a rehash of Cop 1, but it wasn't as spontaneous and funny as the original. As always, let us know your thoughts on Beverly Hills Cop 2 in the comments section, and keep a further lookout for more from Axel Foley and friends, as we tentatively dive into the much maligned Part 3. Was it really the worst entry in the franchise, or did Murphy and co manage to at least bring some humour and raucous action to the threequel? Serge is back, so it can't be all bad, right?
I don't believe this! Well!
Plus, the poster's pretty cool. It's got a roller coaster on it and everything. Stay tuned to find out, movie fans, and we'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.